Hey guys, how's everyone out there in podcast land? This is Richard, and welcome to another edition of What's Spinning. Hope everyone out there is doing well today. I've been trying to expand my musical horizons lately, which is kind of along the lines of what this podcast is all about, kind of learning what's out there and some different things to listen to and how to expand your collection in a way that most benefits you in terms of listening enjoyment. So a couple of things I've been listening to lately. I picked up the old Aha release, Hunting High and Low. That, of course, is the album with the song Take On Me, which was a great 80s song and also a great video for MTV. But the album itself is a pretty solid collection of just 80s rock music in general. It's not super poppy, but it does have that distinct 80s sound. I guess British 80s sound. Although I believe they were actually from Norway. And then along those lines, also was listening to Smith's album yesterday, which, I've known about the Smiths for a long time, listened to some of their stuff off and on, but this was my first dive into a full album of the Smiths, and I found it pretty enjoyable. I get it. I get what it's all about, and it's kind of mood music, which I totally dig. I mean, I like being able to have things to put on for energy. I like being able to have things to put on for when it's kind of cloudy and gloomy. Just lots of different music to suit different moods. I think that's really what it's all about for me, and I hope that's what it's about for you. How's everyone doing in terms of the podcast? What are we doing for you? Has it been helpful? Are there things you'd like to hear? You can always email us at podcast@wildhogrecords.com and interact with us through social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter using @SpinningPodcast. And I really would like to hear from you guys. I've been checking the stats lately. I saw there's a few listeners from the UK, which I'd like to know how you guys are liking this podcast and how you found it, how you came across it. I think originally on the iTunes setup, I just set it for US only because I figured that's all that would really care about what I had to say. But then I released it to other outlets as well, and I guess that somehow got picked up by people in the UK. So also seen a bunch of listeners from Baltimore area and New York area, some in California, and then it looks like my strongest regions, Dallas area and Northwest Arkansas, which is where I am currently based. Yeah, I would love to hear from everybody out there. Like to hear what you think, what you want to hear more about, and definitely album suggestions. I kind of ran into a problem this week where I wasn't really sure which direction to head. I've been doing a lot of older albums lately, so I pulled up the list of the 500 greatest that we've been working off of and tried to pick something, I wouldn't say recent. I mean, it's from late 80s, but definitely more recent than stuff we've been talking about lately. So, one other thing I did want to mention is Record Store Day. Record Store Day is coming up. It is April 13th, 2019. The record store ambassadors for this year is the band Pearl Jam. So, go seek out your local record store. Ask them if they are participating in Record Store Day. If they're not, find one that is. You can go to recordstoreday.com, and I think you can even type in your zip code, and it'll pull up the nearest stores that are close to you that are participating in Record Store Day. I don't think they have any lists out yet for special releases that'll be available, but as soon as I come across those, I will share them with you. And I'll probably highlight some of the things that I think are most interesting off of those lists, because sometimes there's a lot of filler stuff that, maybe appeals to some, or maybe just isn't a genre that I really care about. But, that's what's fun about music is there's all kinds of different people out there with all kinds of different tastes, and that's why they make all kinds of different music. There'll be things on there that won't be of interest to me, might be of interest to you, but I try to highlight the things that I am interested in, just in case you think along the same lines as me. All right. Moving on to today's episode, the album we will be discussing today is Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. Appetite for Destruction was released in 1987. In fact, July 21st, 1987. So this would have been the summer before I entered 5th grade. What I remember most when this album came out was seeing the video for Welcome to the Jungle late at night on MTV. I think it might have been one of those nights where I was spending the night at my grandmother's house, and she used to kind of let me do whatever I wanted. So I would stay up and watch MTV, and I think maybe it came on like Headbangers Ball or something. I don't know if you guys remember that show on MTV, but this video came on, and it was mind-blowing to me. It was a game changer. At that point, you know, in terms of rock, a lot of things coming out were hair metal bands and stuff that's just a little bit softer, and then Guns N' Roses came on the scene, and they were playing just real hard rock music, and they weren't trying to be super showy. It was kind of that, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll atmosphere that kind of died down during the 80s. You know, things were a little bit tame, and this was kind of smacking you in the face with, hey, here's some hard rock, and you're gonna like it. But like I said, this would have been the summer before my 5th grade year of school when this came out. I don't think I heard it right away. It wasn't until late fall of that year or so that I probably heard it. But after hearing that single, I rushed out and bought the album. Luckily, I always had a little bit of freedom in terms of music I could buy. This is one of those similar to, I mentioned Purple Rain on the last single episode, that, you know, that was kind of advanced material for my young age at the time. But this was advanced material as well, but I had a little bit of freedom with what I could listen to because just, you know, my parents never really worried about what trouble I was going to get into or anything. Not that they were bad parents, not saying that at all. In fact, they were very strict when they needed to be, but in terms of things I listened to, they didn't think it was going to corrupt me or anything in any way. And I think they just knew that I had a passion for music, so I was going to seek it out no matter what. So in researching Appetite for Destruction, you know, I thought I knew a lot of stuff about it already. But what I found interesting is that Welcome to the Jungle was actually the second single released. So the first one was It's So Easy, which is another great track from this album. And I always think of that song whenever I hear Welcome to the Jungle played on the radio today, or just hear it being played randomly at some event or venue. And that's because It's So Easy, the bass line for that song starts out, you know, right after Welcome to the Jungle. So I'll hear Welcome to the Jungle, and instantly in my head I hear that next track starting. And it's one of those things that reminds me of what kids miss today with just digital music and not having to play an album all the way through, not knowing what that next track would be in the sequence of tracks on the album. But let's back up to some background information on both Guns N' Roses and the album. So Guns N' Roses, if you aren't familiar, Axl Rose is the lead singer of the band, and when they first formed, they had guitarist Tracy Guns, who then left the band and started the band LA Guns. So Tracy Guns left, was replaced by Slash, and then you had the classic lineup of Guns N' Roses, which was Axl Rose, Duff McKagan on bass, Slash playing guitar, Steven Adler on drums, and Izzy Stradlin playing guitar as well. With that lineup set, the band started building its base by heavily touring the LA club scene, which, you know, in mid to late 80s was going strong. So they would play those clubs for quite a while and work on material. In fact, a lot of the songs that were recorded for Appetite for Destruction were written as they were performing that club circuit. In fact, there were even songs that were on later Guns N' Roses albums that were written at that time and originally considered for Appetite that didn't make the cut, like the songs from the Use Your Illusion albums, Back Off Bitch, You Could Be Mine, that was also featured in Terminator 2, November Rain, and Don't Cry. And I think they've said that the reason they didn't put November Rain on the album was because they already had Sweet Child of Mine, and for an album like this, they didn't need more than one ballad on there. So when they had the Use Your Illusion albums come out, it was a double album set, and they could contain a lot of songs and a couple of ballads. So they were able to work in Don't Cry and November Rain into that mix of songs. I mentioned that the material of the album in terms of content of the songs and stuff was more adult material than I was used to hearing as a 5th grade child. However, even more controversial and adult was the original cover art for the album, which was very controversial and ended up being replaced, and then that cover appeared on the inside of the cassette as just artwork for the album. But it was a painting by artist Robert Williams called Appetite for Destruction, and it depicted a robotic rapist about to be punished by a metal avenger. That was the original cover. Several music retailers refused to stock the album because of it, and they then replaced that with an image depicting a Celtic cross and skulls of the 5 band members, which had been originally designed as a tattoo. Each skull represented one member of the band, so there was Izzy Stradlin at the top, Steven Adler on the left, Axl Rose in the center, Duff on the right, and Slash at the bottom. Versions of the album that were released on double-sided media, so vinyl records and audio cassettes, the 2 sides, instead of being labeled A and B, were labeled G and R. So tracks 1 through 6 made up the G side, which all dealt with drugs and hard life in the big city. And then the remaining tracks on the R side, or the Roses side, all dealt with love, sex, and relationships. As far as accolades for Appetite for Destruction, it is number 62 on our 500 Greatest Albums of All Times list. In 1989, Rolling Stone ranked it as the 27th best album of the 1980s. In 2003, VH1 named Appetite for Destruction the 42nd greatest album of all time. And in 2006, the album was placed number 2 on Guitar World magazine's list of the 100 greatest guitar albums of all time. There were 5 singles released from the album, and in order of their release, there was It's So Easy, Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City, and Night Train. It's hard for me to think about this album and pick just one song. This was definitely one of those that I would listen to all the way through. I remember having the cassette and listening to it while I mowed lawns, while I just sat in my room. I remember reading the liner notes of the cassette over and over and over again, and of course looking at that painting and thinking, what in the world is going on here? I love every song on it. I love how they flow together. Starting the album with Welcome to the Jungle is perfect. That echoey guitar sound at the beginning of Welcome to the Jungle that everyone knows. I mean, they play it at the start of sporting events, and it has a great entrance to an album. So Welcome to the Jungle then flows into It's So Easy, then Night Train, Out to Get Me, Mr. Brownstone, which is an excellent track. Then Paradise City rounds out side 1 of the album. Side 2 starts with My Michelle, Think About You, Sweet Child of Mine, You're Crazy, Anything Goes, and the album finishes with the very solid Rocket Queen. Rocket Queen, of course, has its own story to go along with it in terms of a little bit of the action that took place in recording the song. I won't get into that here because I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping the show at least PG-13, but if you're at all curious about the song Rocket Queen and some of the things that happened in making that song, definitely go check it out, Google it. I think there's even a VH1 video kind of about it. They did a special on the girls of rock and roll, but there is an actual, I guess she goes by the term Rocket Queen now, so something to look up, something to research, a little bit of homework if you are of the appropriate age. Another song that wasn't actually included on the album and has been later released, I think just in the last couple of years, it received a lot of radio play last summer, and that is the song Shadow of Your Love. and that was recorded during these sessions but not included on the album. In fact, for Black Friday, Record Store Day, they released a 7-inch single of Shadow of Your Love, which, if you can find that out there on Discogs or something, definitely go pick it up. It's a red vinyl 7-inch, and the song is awesome. I mean, it sounds like something that would be on Appetite, and I was blown away when I heard it. I was like, whoa, there's songs that are still out there from that time that sound just as good as that album. To me, it was both good and bad that it wasn't included on the album. It was bad because I feel like, man, that was a great song. It should have been on there. At the same time, I'm glad it wasn't, because that allows for us to experience new Guns N' Roses music that sounds like everything we already love. So definitely go check that out. At least look up the song on iTunes if you haven't already heard it. But if you want to own a copy, there's got to be some of those singles out there for probably not too much money. I guess I can't just talk about all the songs all day. I need to pick a favorite song from this album. There's a couple of them that really stand out to me. There's definitely, like I mentioned earlier, It's So Easy. The way that song starts, just the bass line, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it sounds a little bit like this. It's everything I think of when I think of this album. Mr. Brownstone was always good. There's, definitely the radio songs of Paradise City, Welcome to the Jungle. Sweet Child of Mine was a good track. Anything Goes, Rocket Queen. Man, I think I really am going to have to go with It's So Easy, just because it's got everything that I like in a rock song. It definitely has that bass line that I mentioned. But I also like that this song has kind of a punk feel to it. The guitar, you've got that classic slash guitar sound, and definitely a classic slash solo on this one. But I like that Axl uses a lower voice on his vocals for this one. It's not as high up there as he normally gets. And then it kind of drifts off into almost like a dream state sound for the chorus, and then gets back into just rocking hard. So it's kind of a nice complete package of everything it goes through in terms of the sounds of the song, but I like how it comes together. It does have some language in this song, so I was shocked to see that it was the first single off the album. So I'm not sure what they're calling a single at that time, but yeah, like I said, there's a little bit of language, a little bit of graphic imagery, but it's a good song, and it has a nice feel to it. I like the energy to it, and I definitely like I said, the sound of the vocals. It's a little bit different than a lot of the other tracks on the album. But with that being said, what's your favorite song from this album? I know a lot of people love this album, and a lot of people have to have favorite songs. So, let me know what yours is. Maybe it's Welcome to the Jungle. Maybe it's Paradise City. Maybe it's Rocket Queen. So definitely let us know what your favorite one is, because that's another thing I find interesting, is just kind of learning what everybody likes. I kind of like that human study, right, of how everyone has different opinions on things and how they see things a little bit differently. So let me know what you like. Let me know why. That's a good part too. All right, so what have we gotten lately? Let's see here. Got to look through the old collection, pull up my list of new arrivals. I don't think it's been that active lately, but we'll see what's new here. Pull up the old... Oh, by the way, if I haven't mentioned it before, I like to keep my collection in Discogs. If you're not using Discogs for tracking your collection, you should do it. There is an app for it, and the app can even scan barcodes if you've got a recent enough album that has a barcode on it. Then it'll pull it up. You can pick which version you have, save it to your collection. I'm even maintaining now... I've got separate folders within my collection. So I've got my main collection. I've got a 7-inch collection listed underneath that. And then I've got a list for each of my kids of things I'm giving them. I even have a folder called For Kids, so things that they don't have yet, but I've already set aside to be giving them. And then I've got a For Sale folder, because every once in a while I like to thin out the collection, things that I'm not listening to much, or that I'm like, well, I don't know why I bought that one. I probably don't need it. So I'll put those in there as well. As far as new additions, I already told you guys about Punkorama. That was a great one. And then what came just, I think, later that same day that I recorded the last episode was the re-release of Unwritten Law's album, Unwritten Law. SRC Vinyl, or Shop Radio Cast, they put together a set number. I think they only did 500 copies of it in fire orange, and it is beautiful, and it sounds just as good as I remember. That's one I used to listen to on CD, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but what I really like about albums is the artwork. And so that Unwritten Law album, when I had it on CD, the liner notes and everything were inside the CD case like they always are, but the CD case itself had come in just a cardboard outer sleeve, and so the case was just a solid black plastic, and you couldn't see the cover of the album through that. And that always bothered me, that it was just plain black, and I really liked the artwork. So I was glad that this album has the artwork. It's kind of a sphinx image with the sunlight behind it, or with the orange sun. So the fire orange vinyl really goes well with that. If you're not familiar with this album, I definitely recommend it. Of course, I recommend most everything I mention on here, but this is the 20th anniversary of the album, so I guess that means it came out in 1999. You don't have to get it on fire orange. I think they also released it on white vinyl. I think there's more copies of that available, but some good tracks on here. It's kind of that maybe pop punk. I know Unwritten Law had some more commercial success after this album, but this one, I can't remember what song I heard that brought me to this album, but I remember picking it up, and I've always loved it. It's always been one of my favorites. So once I saw that it was released on vinyl, I had to go and get it. And this is a little bit of a sad story to me anyway. Speaking of finding out things are being released on vinyl, I've started keeping a list. This was after I made the What's Spinning single episode about things that should be pressed on vinyl that are not. And so I've started keeping a list on Discogs of that, just so it can notify me if there's ever any changes in items on that list. So if things do become available on vinyl, it'll kind of notify me and just say, hey, there's a new version of this release out there. So I was thinking about that list the other day, and I was thinking, well, I want to go add Better Than Ezra's Deluxe album on there, which is the one that had the song Good. And I just really like that album because it reminds me of my high school days. That was probably around my junior, senior year of high school. And it's just one of those, like I said, those albums that you have an emotional attachment to. So I went to go add that album to that list, and then I found out that they had a project that people could go and, I guess, do pre-orders on, and then that was released in just this past January, so just a month ago, that was released on vinyl. It was a 2 LP set, so people could either just purchase the album itself, or they could purchase a signed copy, and they did, and it sold out, and the project's now over, and I can't find anybody online selling a copy of that. And I think that hurts me a little bit deep down inside, because I would love to have that on vinyl. And from what I've heard of the people that did get it, the pressing is superb. They went through and pulled it from the master tapes. They specifically mastered it to be on vinyl, and it sounds great from what people are saying online. But nobody has one for sale. I thought they pressed like a few thousand copies, so I can't believe that those are all snatched up. Maybe they got snatched up by flippers who are going to eventually release them for extremely high prices. Hopefully that doesn't happen, and hopefully they just press more copies and they'll be more available. Speaking of pressing copies that need to be available, the band Hum. I don't know how many people out there like the band Hum, but I love them. I love their album You'd Prefer an Astronaut with the song Stars, and also their album Downward is Heavenward. And they have been, actually the singer from the band has been releasing copies of Downward is Heavenward through his label, Earth Analog Records. And they're all sold out as well, but I think he said he's working on getting another batch pressed. There's like a 2-month waiting list between getting them to the presser and having them pressed. That's how popular vinyl is right now. But after that 2-month waiting list, hopefully he'll have more available on his website. So that's the story with Downward is Heavenward. And then there's You'd Prefer an Astronaut, which has been available for quite some time through SRC Vinyl, the same ones that did Unwritten Law. But there's a little bit of controversy there, and that I heard that SRC they're pressing that album without permission from the band. And hopefully Matt from Hum will eventually get his hands on You'd Prefer an Astronaut and do a quality pressing of that through Earth Analog as well. That would be perfect. So that's all I got for this week. I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you continue to do well. And like I said, hit me up. Let me know what's going on. I'd like to know how you found us, if you're enjoying it. Again, it's on social media at Spinning Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And then there's always the email address, podcast@wildhogrecords.com. All right, guys, have a great week. I will talk to you later.